There's a lot happening with New Jersey's child welfare system. We want to help you make sense of it and share our story. This is DCF on the Air.
This is DCF on the Air, and I'm Jason Bukowski. Early on in this administration, Commissioner Beyer embarked on what she referred to as the listening tours. She met with over 500 participants in the first listening tour session to really hear from people that were involved with the system, either as service recipients. In some cases, she talked to some of the providers, but talking to people that had involvement with the system in a way that we maybe didn't do before this administration. That initial listening tour informed our efforts to make family voice a key component in the work that we do during this administration. And I think it's really one of the defining aspects of DCF right now and the work that we're doing. So today I'm joined by leaders within the DCF Office of Family Voice, and I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves, and we'll talk a little bit about that work. Go ahead.
Thanks. I'm Katie Bergalt, and I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Family Voice. So I'm really grateful and privileged to lead the work with an amazing team.
Yep, I'm Blake Connor. I'm the Executive Assistant here at the Office of Family Voice. I've been lucky enough to be with the office since it started, and I've seen how much we've done and achieved, and it's really great to be here talking about it.
Hi, I'm Brianna Moore. I'm a Youth Council alumni member, and now I'm currently a LEEP consultant member.
And we're going to ask you about what that means, because I think it's really important. But welcome all three to DCF on the Air.
Thanks.
So the Office of Family Voice was launched in 2018. I'm wondering, since its inception, how has Family Voice shaped the direction of the department?
I mean, you said it, Jason, right, about the listening tour. And so I feel like it was the listening tour. It was Family Voice that created the need for Family Voice even more at the department, right? So it was Family Voice that said, family saying, youth saying, like, we're not being heard, right? And then it was Commissioner Beyer saying, not only are families not being heard and we're not listening to their experiences, but to do business and be as responsive as we can as government, we need to involve them in the work that we're doing. And so they shaped, right, the creation of the office. And then, I mean, Brianna could speak to it, Blake could speak to it. The priorities that have been generated by the councils has really propelled a lot of systemic change, right? Like they've actually are shaping the direction of the department by saying this is what the department needs to look like. And then our office is really positioned to shape the direction of the department because we are charged with making family voice and listening to families, and then even more partnering with them meaningfully to make change as a core approach of how we do our work at the department. So the intention is that our office is supporting the entire department in doing its work in a different way that's really led by families.
And you mentioned partnering meaningfully. And I think that sort of, previously, before this administration, there were opportunities for individuals with lived experience to serve on boards. I'm thinking of like the New Jersey Task Force on Child Abuse and Neglect had a representative from the youth that served in that capacity. But I think that the difference here is, partnering meaningfully, but also giving them the opportunity to serve in almost like a co-leadership position or a shared leadership position. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I think that's, at the foundation, we talk about authentic engagement, right? And authentic partnership. And that is exactly what we mean by that, is that we're striving for shared leadership. So the councils have a role, right, in saying this is what we think is a priority, and they work with DCF staff to make changes towards those priorities. And we're doing it through co-design, right? So we're striving. We want to be realistic too. And we're striving for shared leadership, meaning that all decisions are made together, and working to do that through co-designing. There's a new initiative, right, that the councils or others have put forward. How are we doing that work really hand in hand, staff and families together?
Yeah. Brianna, can you talk a little bit about your experiences with the Youth Council in particular? When you came into that position, you may have had, an expectation of what this would be, or, how much access you might have. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about whether your experiences with the Youth Council met those expectations, or was it something different, and maybe you had more access than you thought you were going to have?
Yeah, so when I came into the youth council, I really didn't know like what I was really getting into, but I know like when I was told from my foster mom that like it was going to be used to share my experience and everything like that. So when I got there, I was like nervous, and then like everybody welcomed me, and I just felt like it was a really safe space to share my story and actually be heard. And like from that point on, we accomplished so many things, like the Sibling Bill of Rights and the Enlightenment and the NJYRS. So we just really sat down at a table, and we wrote our priorities and what we wanted to do to make the department better. So
great.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for serving in that role.
Thank you.
Blake, you were with the office from the start.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, how unique is New Jersey's position around family voice when comparing that to other jurisdictions, or other jurisdictions either in child welfare or maybe outside of child welfare doing something similar to what we're doing with the Office of Family Voice?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, we mentioned the listening tour. Really, families were saying that they hadn't been heard from. But agencies, not just in child welfare, have been trying to incorporate family voice, incorporate voices, and listen to folks for more than 20 years, for a long time. But it hasn't always worked well, right? It often is a lot more along the lines of a focus group that doesn't lead to changes.
Yeah.
By creating this office and really adding the resources to the department, it allows for family voice to really move down that continuum that they talk about and come much closer to real co-design and real strategic sharing and conversations that advance with the department and staff and with the youth and the parents that we work with that have that lived experience. Our office has the ability to support staff in conversations that they're having with people with lived experience, and also the folks that are meeting with them, so that everybody's coming to that table and ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Brianna, in your response before, you mentioned joining the Youth Council, it felt like a safe space to be able to share your experiences and your ideas. And this question is really for all three of you. I'm wondering, how do we balance that idea of an emotionally safe space and safe sharing with the need for authentic leadership and co-design? Because I think that, telling our stories, it's coming from a place of vulnerability. We're sharing some really, serious things that may have happened to us in the past in order to propel change. But being able to do that in an emotionally safe way, I think, has been a priority of the Office of Family Voice. So I think that if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll speak, and then I think Brianna's like the expert here, really. Like we've been talking about, the goal of our office is to advance shared leadership and co-design, right? So the goal of our office is actually not that people are, that it's a given that they're sharing their story per se, right? People are sharing their experiences, and they may see it as sharing their story, but we do a lot of prep to help people be ready to do that. So there's there's training on strategic sharing, right? And where we've brought in a lot of that training. Everybody gets that preparation. They get time to practice, and that's us learning from people with lived experience, right? Like even at the national level, some of these trainings and resources we use are from people with lived experience who've done advocacy work, who are saying, this is the way you can do this in a safe way, and here, let's practice it. And then we do a lot of prep when it comes to like specific individual events or conversations or meetings. It's like, let's sit down and really talk through and give you that support you need to figure out what you want to say, where it feels powerful, it feels safe. And it's, with the ultimate goal too of being effective, right? To supporting advocacy and advancing change.
Yeah, I would just add on to that, like just really understanding your audience and who you're sharing to. Sometimes sharing your story can be a trigger point for yourself or for others, and just being mindful that, what you've been through has been is a sensitive topic, but knowing that you can use that sensitive topic for change and really just sticking to the points that you went through that you want to make and change in the department, so that kids who are in, foster care now, that they don't have to go through, what myself or my fellow council members have. So that's what I would say. And just really being mindful of the change that you want to make, and not being afraid to open up about certain changes. And it was crazy on the way here. I was just thinking, like, sometimes being nervous or being afraid of judgment can make you silent, and don't allow that to make you silent. Keep speaking up for yourself and make that change.
Yeah, sometimes I think I could use a little bit of that nervousness because I'm never silent.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think I could benefit from being a little more silent sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think I think there's something empowering too, to sharing your story, with a goal of, I'm gonna make sure that this means something.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna push this, I'm gonna do what I need to do to, push the system in a new direction so that my experiences are maybe the last time someone experiences that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can I just say how awesome it is to hear Brianna talking about this? Because just last night, we had a parent council meeting. We'll talk about it. They're early phases.
Yeah.
And they are so ready to go to tell that story, right? But we talk about strategic sharing and how important it is. And it's not as easy as common sense, because you want to tell that frustrating, traumatized story. But what you actually want to do is create change.
Yeah.
Purpose of advocacy is to create change, right? How do we do that? And that does not mean telling that story. It does not mean you have to re-traumatize yourself explaining what has happened to you at all. But it is work to get to a place where you're able to say, I want to get to this change, and I want to tell you the piece of the story that I want to tell you to inspire that change. And hearing from them last night, ready to go, and hearing from Brianna right now, just understanding how important it is so awesome, because I know that they're going to get there too.
Yeah, and being mindful of your audience, I think is a really important consideration, because you might be ready to tell your story. You've done the work, you've talked through with a counselor, you've reached a point where I can tell my story, and I can push for that change. Someone else might be in that audience and not ready to hear that because of their own experiences.
Exactly.
So, being mindful of that audience, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and I would just wanted to add one more thing. And just being on the youth council, they always created that safe space to decline when you're presenting or anything. Like, if you feel uncomfortable, or if there was a question in the audience that was asked, like, we have our right to our story, and being able to choose whether we want to share or go further. So I really respect that strategy that they gave me.
So when I think of the organization of the Office of Family Voice, how that work is sort of organized, I think it's the Office of Family Voice is sort of the staffing side of it, but then the real work happens within the councils. The things that are happening, with those people that have the lived experience. And I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the specific councils that are working through the Office of Family Voice right now. And I think I'm going to start with our oldest, even though they're not our oldest population, but the DCF Youth Council, which came in 2019. We're now on our, I believe, third cohort, which came in January. And I know that they recently identified some priorities. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about those priorities for their work over the next 2 years.
Yeah, sure. And I would be remiss if I didn't give Asia, who is the youth engagement advisor and facilitates that group, didn't give her, a shout out and acknowledgement, because she has, been right there in partnership with the Youth Council, done so much work to help prepare them, like we were talking about with sharing their story, and then turning that into what are our priorities as a group, right? So that there's the whole process they've gone through, right? And it's taken a lot of work for them to get to, I think they have about 10 or 11 kind of key priorities, really based again on everybody's experiences that they've identified, and as a group saying like, wow, I had that experience too. Like, this is a thing that we're all seeing, right? But then they've really narrowed down to 3 that they're starting right now to do really concerted work on. And so those are, I think, first and foremost is the priority area around the support for youth as they're transitioning to adulthood, and aging out, as they say, of the system. That's the first one. And so with that one, they're really saying like, One, they're saying we don't feel as though we've been really adequately prepared to approach adulthood. We want like meaningful, realistic, when we need it support. You know, there's this range of programs, and youth may have a lot of workers, right, that are working with them and supporting them. But they're saying we want this like when we need it, at the moment we need it. I want somebody who's going to help me with my taxes, like right now, right? So they're saying we need that realistic support that feels less like a service and more like a natural support. They want that. And so how do we kind of work to transform the way services are offered or build on the good things that are happening that they've identified, to continue to have them have that support and those relationships in place to feel like they have the people around them to help them move to adulthood. And then the other piece they're saying is, you know, at 21, you age out of the system, right? If you choose to stay in past 18, 21 is the cutoff. And so they're saying we're not fully ready by then, right? To not have the support, to not have the people around us. So what can DCF do to support them further? You know, and they're talking about the age 26, let's say, but what can DCF do to support them after their case closes, right? And they don't have all of that same formal support. What can DCF offer? How can there be a touch point? How can there be natural supports around them? What can DCF do to help build that? That's like their number one. That's like where there's a lot of work kind of jumping off right now. But then also they're saying, and it's really related to mental health supports for youth, right? And we know that's like a priority here in New Jersey, by the governor's level. It's a priority within the children's system of care here at DCF. But they're saying, like, again, we want that to look like realistic, to look like it's what we want. We want to be connected to our therapist. We want other things that wrap around us that offer that mental health support, not just traditional therapy. So that's another one. And kind of tied with that is the experience specifically for youth who've been in residential treatment and in, you know, congregate care for mental or behavioral health treatment. There's area work that they want to do in that area because a lot of the youth council have that experience. And then the final one is kind of related to their case record in two ways. One is when I am 18 and I could have access to my record, I want access to my record. And there's limitations, right? There's legal limitations. But they're saying, let's figure out what can I get access to? And they've also had the conversation about like, what can I get access to safely? Meaning like, how am I going to process the information that I do get? But they want more information. You know, youth who've been in the system, who've been in foster care for a long time, there's a lot of holes in their story that they may not even know. So they're saying that. And then on the flip side of it, related to the case record, they're saying, I also want a chance to have my voice in my case record. It's all this caseworkers explaining me, describing me, like where do I get to talk about myself? And so that's another piece that they're looking to work on is youth having their voice in their record and being able to speak for themselves about themselves.
That all sounds amazing. And I think that's, you know, thinking about sort of what came before with the youth council. And Brianna, you might be the best person to ask about this because, you know, a recent youth council alumni, you know, the priorities that you worked on when you were there are different than these priorities.
Yeah.
And I think that the beauty of the youth council, you know, in relatively short amount of time, we've had 3 different groups of youth council members come in, make a mark, and they've all made marks, addressed an issue within the system or you know, directed change you know, from within the system. But to be able to make your mark and then go on to something else in your advocacy journey, whether that's within DCF, whether that's working somewhere else, and to see the next group come in and say, all right, I'm picking up the ball and I'm going to run it the next 5 yards. You know, what is that like to be able to kind of see where they're going from where you left them?
I'm really proud of them. I definitely want to shout them out. I was looking over their priorities and I was like, the third one, the youth perspective inclusive in their case records, I think that's important because now I currently work as a peer-to-peer navigator, mentoring youth in foster care from ages 14 to 21. And during our engagement phase, like we get their caseloads and their referrals. So I steer away from reading their caseloads because I want to be able to take that engagement phase to really get to know them for themselves and for them to open up to me in a comfortable format. And that happens over time. So just having them write their own, you know, statement of who they are and, you know, their traumas or whatever they want to put in that, that case record is important. And that will give me the opportunity to be like, wow, like I'm reading it from their perspective and not somebody else's. Because it could be definitely misconstrued, reading it from two different point of views. So, but now, seeing them, it's really impactful that they're doing the 21, more support, because, you know, I'm just turned 26 and, you know, so I'm still trying to figure it out. So having that support even after 21 is really important. But I would say for my cohort, and when we were doing the Sibling Bill of Rights and the peer-to-peer enlightenment, I see the work, how it's changed youth in care now. For an example, one of my youth, we got to reconnect them because of the Sibling Bill of Rights, and just having that law and educating these youth and really knowing that it's their right. And then just seeing the impactful for the enlightenment program, how every day I'm working and mentoring with these youth and seeing how much they're transforming and they're graduating and they're going to college and they're getting the job they wanted. And they're like, wow, like you understand me, Bree. And it's like, those are the things that I do what I do. I advocate for youth and what I do for my work. So it's a powerful thing.
No, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
Work with you and the members of the Youth Council around the Sibling Bill of Rights, which ensures that, you know, you will always have those sibling bonds and connections when you're in placement. I think that was an amazing experience, and to see, you know, you wrote the legislation. Your team wrote the legislation. You advocated with the legislators. You met with the governor. Like all of those things. And then, you know, enlightenment, of course, having that person in your life that is a mentor, that's experienced some of the things that you've experienced, you know, because they also went through placement and they were also involved with the system and can direct you with what they know and what they've found out. I think both of those things are super powerful.
Yeah.
But I want to turn to one of the Youth Council projects that's near and dear to my heart, because I've also been included in this one, which is njyrs.org, the New Jersey Youth Resource Spot. Blake, can you talk a little bit about what that is? I guess with our first cohort, the work around NJYRS, and it's continued throughout, and it's still ongoing. So can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the very first council gets together. They're talking about what they need to change. And they're saying, we don't have any resources. There's no good websites that exist. We wish we could just be informed and inform others, right? Turns out there already was a website. Over the next couple of years, they really explored and explained what their vision was for it. And they envisioned a website that didn't as much try to talk to all people, staff and youth and everybody else. It was just built around youth. And folks like that going to it, understanding what the resources are available. And they launched this in 2022 after 2 years of planning. And this is, you talk about unique before of unique things in New Jersey. And this is really unique because it's hosted by the state of New Jersey, a website that is absolutely run by the state of New Jersey, but it's led by the Youth Council. And so that means the content that you might want on it as communications, as other offices in the department, that goes through the Youth Council. They look at it and they say, this doesn't really work for us. It needs to be rewritten in this way that can really help youth. Yeah. The pictures, the formatting, how you click around, they continue to modernize it. Shout out to April Chabak, who is the program coordinator for the Office of Family Voice. She was on the Youth Council. She created some of the initial designs for it. And she now, within our office, works for our office and now leads the subcommittee of the Youth Council that continues to kind of advance that work. Yeah. And it's absolutely a great website.
And what's really great about working with the Youth Council members on that is that, one, I don't have to write anything. I write a lot, but for that, I don't have to, because they're the ones writing the content and they bring it to me and I say, you know, this might work a little bit better this way or that way. I'm just kind of using the editorial eye that I would for any of my other colleagues. But they're generating all of that content themselves and and in a youth voice. And sometimes, if I'm providing an editorial suggestion, they say, no, we're going to keep it this way. It's like,
Yeah.
All right, you're the experts. I trust you on this.
Yeah, just to pull back the curtain a little bit, you talk about co-design, right? We have a monthly meeting where the youth, all of the people within the department, we even have other departments, Office of OIT, New Jersey's OIT that works with us. They all meet at the same time. But then there are other meetings at least once a week where they might be working with the youth specifically to say, did you understand everything that was said there? What other questions do you have? Going back to the staff to say, okay, this or that, we need to re-explain in a way that works so that co-design is happening, staff, youth council members, and coming together so that really it's all connected and also led by the youth.
Yeah. And I think beyond the priorities for the work, which I think are the driving force for the youth council and all of the councils, just the impact that they've had on every other aspect of the work that we do. I know that from communications, we view the youth council as an asset. And, when we're going out with a campaign, as I did with a youth mental health campaign, I started drafting content. I shared it with the members of the youth council. They ripped me apart.
Yes,
and then, but we got to a place of having something in youth voice that spoke to the things that we had identified as a priority as a department. But they had, and it was only maybe like, it wasn't very long for them to do it. But that work helped to get us to a place where we were more engaging, more resonant with the individuals who we're trying to serve. So, and it's not just the youth council. We know that this is happening across the lived experience continuum as we bring in lived experts to direct us and say, well, this is what I need, or this is what I need to hear. So that's super powerful. I'm wondering if we can talk about council, which is the Dad's Council, which is Dad's, I'm going to screw this up.
Achieving dynamic success.
Dynamic success.
Yes, which they came up with that.
They came up with that. Again, this was directed by them. This was messaging that was directed by them. And I'm wondering, because their design is a little bit different than the youth council. I think some of the dads have been on for a while, but their work is a little bit different too. So I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about what their current priorities are, what are some of the things that they're working on, and what are some of the things that they've achieved over the course of the time that they've been impaneled.
Yeah. You kind of said it right, that there was an intentionality around taking a bit of a different approach with the Dad's Council, which they then changed the name like last year to the Dad's Council. But some of them have been on since the very beginning, since 2020. Some of them have been on the council. Kareem Lovelace, who's the Fatherhood Engagement Advisor, he's now worked to figure out a way that he can have the space, there can be the space for voices of dads who are newer to the council and the dads who've been on the council for a long time. So he's actually got two groups. Leaders are the new guys and advocates are the fathers who've been on the council for longer. So he has that space, right, where there's space there to hear from a lot of fathers. So they, over the course of their time, right, since the Dad's Council's inception, one thing they did was work to develop, design, draft an administrative order, which is a policy document, right, that lays out the department's commitment to working with fathers. And that's really focused first and foremost on the work to, identify fathers, bring them in, partner with them when there is like a DCPMP case, right, the engagement of them, the partnership around the case plan and what services they need. So it kind of lays out a lot. And it also lays out an expectation around the support that staff need to reduce bias towards fathers. So there's a piece in there around that. And I say that because they did develop, revise and develop new priorities recently, and they presented those to the commissioner back in April. And they are just very clear about that the overarching goal of their work is about reducing the bias towards fathers, right? And they're able to name a lot of experiences they've had where there's been bias towards them, right? And specific examples. And so that's like the overarching goal. And then within that, there's this real connection with the training piece. So one of their priorities, even though we've had the conversation, they acknowledge, like, we all say training is not the answer to necessarily to reducing bias, right? Or eliminating bias is really the goal, but it's one piece. And so that's one of their current priorities, right? Is getting into the training that DCF already has around working with fathers. It's called Fathers Are Important. One, really evaluating that training for themselves, participating in it, and then evaluating it and saying what works, what doesn't, what's missing from this, is this enough? We envision that part of that will be that that fathers will be involved in the training, meaning co-facilitating training, either that one or a supplemental piece. But fathers need to be involved. People need to be hearing directly from fathers. That's what they're saying, and that's what we certainly believe. So we're partnering with the Office of Training and Professional Development around that work. So that's one of their priority areas. Another one is just basic around information. They're saying that fathers, and sharing their examples, right, of how they didn't get adequate information at the time when there was an investigation or when a case was opened, that they didn't have the information they needed to understand what their role was, how the case works. We now have a new parent council who I believe could echo this. Any parent saying maybe they're not getting the information that they need to really understand their rights and their responsibilities, let's say too. So they are now working with DCP&P, the Division of Child Protection and Permanency, on the handbook. So there's a handbook that exists. It's supposed to be handed out to every single parent. It's available online. They're working to revise that. They're saying, there's just not enough information in here. I know they had like a 4-hour meeting the other day to just dig into it, right? And there are fathers that are sitting on that work group. They're bringing information back to the entire council to work on that handbook. So that's one of the other pieces. How are fathers and parents getting information about how the case works, about what's happening? And then the other piece, relatedly, is accountability, we're saying. And what that really, where that's kind of led to, what they've identified as a priority to make the department more accountable to families, to continue to work on that, is what's the grievance process? What is the grievance process when families are not seeing the way the case is working, that it's not meeting their needs, that their rights are maybe being not addressed correctly? They're saying that there needs to be a really well-defined grievance process. Sure. And the commissioner's supportive of that. So there is an Office of Advocacy that does a lot of amazing work, right, to follow up, to contact caseworkers, to figure out what's going on when families reach out to them. And the fathers are saying, let's take it farther. And like I said, the commissioner of the department is agreeing. Let's take it farther. What is the grievance process? How does that work? Let's lay it out, and hopefully it's going to line up that gets laid out in this handbook. That's the plan that we're working on right now, is to get that to create that process that just, like, again, creates more rights for families, holds the department as accountable as it should be for the role that it has in intervening in families' lives.
I think beyond the systemic change, and I think this is sort of the dichotomy that I saw, from the outside, looking at the work of the Youth Council versus the Dads Council. The Youth Council, the members of the youth were very much of a let's go mentality. It's my teen son says, let them cook. Like, they want to get in there. They want to, like, okay, we're rolling up our sleeves, we're getting to work, we're going to make those systemic changes. The Dads Council also is making very systemic and tactical changes, but they're also focused a lot on sort of the individual healing journey for members. Mm-hmm. And I know that at one point, talking with Kareem, celebrating some of the dad's accomplishments. One dad got reunited with his child, and they were able to get an apartment for the first time. Things like that, where I feel like the Dads Council, there's that other component, and I think it's there for the Youth Council as well, but really focused on sort of the individual healing journey of the members, as well as the systemic reforms that they're advancing as a whole unit, as lived expert, authentic leaders co-design. Yeah,
I would say that that's true, and I think it's part of why Kareem has figured out the way to carve out space for the fathers who are newer to the council and the fathers who've been around a long time. And he helps that with that balance, because it is a supportive space. And it's true that all the councils function in that way. And sometimes there's this challenge around giving space for people to share and talk and process, and also turning that into, you know, what is the recommendation? What is the work that we're going to make based on the experiences that you've had? And Kareem does a good job of balancing that. And the fathers are so supportive of each other. There's examples of, you know, relationships being developed and people doing individual reach outs to each other and supporting each other. And that's really one thing that's great, in addition to the systemic change that's come out of their work.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thinking of systemic change, Blake, I know you can talk about some of the work that was done around child support, and how that's, you know, the dads have had a very real impact in the policies of the department in how we work with parents around issues of child support when it's being collected by the system to support their kids in the system.
Absolutely. You just mentioned let them cook, and I wanted to add to that because I think this does, right? Sometimes with the youth, they've been told directly by the workers, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, right?
Yeah.
When they join the youth council, they're like, this is the policy that you need to change because I've been told that I should get $112 and that does not allow me to live a life.
Yeah.
With the fathers, there's a lot more of an exploration to it. I was not involved whatsoever. I do not feel like I had a good situation happen, but I'm not able to put my finger on the problem because I was cloudy. I wasn't involved. So sometimes through those conversations, like child support, it's just about them talking it out that we kind of land on things that are obvious, right? And child support's an example. So what the fathers brought up early was when children are placed, child support is taken from both the mom and the dad. This is not a father-only situation. Yeah. But if you're a father, imagine that the child that might not have been living with you has been removed, and you're now trying to have them live with you. Yeah. You're trying to find a home that's a little bigger. You're trying to support them. At that same time, the system is often telling you need to do all these extra services, and you're now getting child support taken away from you. The child support didn't help at all. And it was identifying that. They raised it to the commissioner. She said, oh, wow, like absolutely, let's form a work group. And luckily, it was at a time when really nationally, this was kind of beginning to become something that other agencies and federally, they were saying, you know, you really got to adjust this. This does not work at all. This is not what we're intending. This does not help reunification. So the fathers were able to kind of collaborate with that work group and explain how it had impacted them, you know, what needed to happen, how it could work differently. And we had them ready to go when that work group was set up. To kind of explore and explain all of the different options. And with their work, with the work group's work, with the commissioner's support, this department has stopped taking child support, has stopped collecting child support when children are in placement. And that's really an awesome thing that's inspired by their voices.
Yeah, and it serves the goal of reunification so much. Our whole goal as a system is to get youth back to their family of origin. Why are we putting families in that position of not being able to do that? Because we're collecting funds we don't need to support children when we have those funds. We're good. Mm-hmm. Like, why are we taking it from the families that have the least in order to put them in a position where they'll never get back to where they need to provide for their own kids?
Yeah, and the reality was we really weren't collecting child support. The state wasn't collecting child support, but oftentimes parents were winding up in jail, right? Mm-hmm. Which isn't helping anything and is costing the state a lot more than reunification would.
Katie, can you talk a little bit about the role that the Dad's Council has taken in terms of advocating for fathers' experiences outside of child welfare? Because I know that, and I know the Youth Council's done this too, but I think the Dad's Council really embodies this idea of, I know they've met with Congressman Andy Kim. I know they've talked to the courts about fathers' experiences in family courts. So can you talk a little bit about what they're doing to represent fathers' experiences in the larger, what we say child welfare system? It's not just DCF, but that larger child and family serving system in New Jersey.
Yeah. Well, I thought of it when we were talking about the child support example because they've also there's been connections with the Department of Human and Services and the Division of Child Support Engagement, right? Like they've spoken with that division. Fathers have spoken alongside Kareem at the child support conference, the statewide conference, right? So there's been this where it's trickled from their experience with having child support taken from them when their child is in care to the larger experience of having child support taken from you, how you're engaged in that process, how you're supported with the co-parent, right, in navigating the need for resources, right? And so it's like they've gone there with that, right? So there's been connections with the Department of Human Services. You mentioned it too, in terms of the court system and the administrative office of the courts. There is a continual conversation that we're having with members of the administrative office of the courts and judges and lawyers. We had fathers present to the deputy attorney generals, who are the lawyers for DCF and DCP&P. But that's been really an ongoing conversation. So they've presented recommendations. They've been involved in reviewing the handbook that going back some time now, but the handbook that was recently revised, that is like when you're in court, when you're in family court, here's the handbook. And we're at a place right now of figuring out where do we go next with that, as far as like there's a lot of opportunities and interest. And I think it's kind of reflective of there may be emphasis on family voice and parent voice, and sometimes that defers to mothers for different reasons, right? And I think we're as a child and family serving system, and maybe societally, culturally a little behind with listening to fathers as parents. And so for that reason, in part, I think there's been more asks coming their way, right? From other partners, from other stakeholders, from aligned systems. And I think there's been a lot of interest from the fathers in meeting those asks, because they're like, wow, like these are the other systems impacting my life, right? So let's talk and share our experiences and hope that can inform change.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic, and it really shows how far we can really transform. It's not just the DCF, the department itself, where we're creating spaces to transform across the board. All of these systems that are impacting youth, impacting fathers, impacting parents. So let's talk a little bit about the new Parents Council that recently had their first meeting. And Blake, I know that you work very closely with that group. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the space that the Parent Council is intended to inhabit within the family voice continuum. And are there overlaps with what the Dad's Council is doing and with what the Parents Council will be doing?
Absolutely. Parent Council is something we've wanted to do as an office for a while now, and it is great that we're able to finally, it's so exciting that we're able to put this team together. We have met for the third time. We have 30 very passionate parents coming together. And really what we're looking for with this council is kind of the primary caretaker who's been involved with the system, right? Who has all of that experience, right? So for the most part, it's moms, but we also have fathers, and we anticipate we're going to hear a lot of the stories that the fathers have echoed as long as they've been around, and we're going to have them team together to talk about the handbook, to talk about advocacy. I think there's a lot of work that can happen with the Youth Council too. Even within our office with staff health and wellness, right? Parents often talk about how staff are treated, right? So we want to have these councils begin to kind of collaborate with one another as they build their own priorities. One thing I'll say is that we have a new parent engagement specialist, Alphatia Hampton Miller, who's joined us. And what I think I see that's with the Parent Council that I am surprised about is the dedication that they're ready to bring. When we design our councils, we kind of look around and see what else the rest of the country is doing to try to base what's reasonable, right? But with our Youth Council, with our Fathers Council, and with our Parents Council, we meet more often than any of the other councils which we see around the country. So we built it out. We said we're going to meet twice a month, right? And we're going to meet for 90 minutes and then 60 minutes because that's as much as we can ask of you. A couple meetings in, they're like, we are not meeting enough. So they bumped it up to 90 minutes, and they're coming to everything. And they're ready to go. And I think that we're going to really be able to talk about some awesome priorities and initiatives at the next podcast.
Well, you will have to get you penciled in because we have a lot of things to talk about at DCF. But I also want to talk about another new initiative from the Office of Family Voice, which is the Lived Expert. Screw this one up too.
Expertise.
So new.
So the Lived Expert, go ahead, Brianna.
The Lived Experience Expert Partnership.
Lived Experience Expert Partnership.
Yes, there you go.
LEEP Consultants.
Yes.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about what this consultancy is sort of designed to do. And I know that it brings in members from some of our other councils and maybe people from outside of the traditional family voice work, but they might be working in other areas within the department. What's the vision with the LEEP consultancy, and what do we plan to do with this?
Yeah, so LEEP, like we said, was the name was generated by the work group that has done all of the work to create the partnership, right? And the partnership, and we're intentional about using the word partnership and not program, because we feel like it's easy to say program, right? Like all the time we go to that in our work, that we're providing services through programs to families, right? But the idea and the intentionality around the use of the word partnership is that it really is a partnership. And the way that we started that partnership is through the work group. And I'll talk about that a little bit, but the basic purpose of it is that, and it's to take it to the next level, right? So we have councils, and there's a lot of folks on councils, and Blake could speak to it, being the one who's been here the longest, to say like, there's a lot of other requests that come in to get family voice, right? Yeah. To have families involved in the work across the department. There's a lot of work happening. We've had to turn down some of those. We could only, ask so much, right? People have lives. We could only ask so much of the youth and the dads and the parents. And I'll say, in addition, we really want to elevate the role, right? So like the language is intentional around lived experience expert. The purpose is that folks are bringing they're prepared and supported, right, to bring their expertise as a consultant to work across the department, to work shoulder to shoulder is the phrase that we're using, shoulder to shoulder with staff in projects across the department, right? The councils have their priorities. That's what they're advancing. They get asked to do a lot of other stuff in addition to that, and they can't be everywhere, and we are building this as a core approach. And so people with lived experience as lived experts need to be involved in all of the work. And so that's the goal of LEEP, right? And we recognize that there's like preparation, there's support they need, there is lots of training we can offer to help people be in a place where they're at the same table. They're helping build the table. They're not just, given a seat, but it's a table that's not set for them to be there. So that's why we're offering that prep and support. And like the flip side of it is that staff, people in staff positions need the kind of the same level of preparation and support to be able to partner in this way, right? It is different than we may have traditionally in government been used to doing our work. And so we recognize that, and we want to ensure that the experience is meaningful for both sides, and that requires us like offering that support, helping build the capacity of staff to be in the place to do that work well with people who have lived experience. And then it's been created by a work group. It's a total co-design process. The work group, like you mentioned, made up of former youth council members, dad's council members, folks who are involved with powerful families, powerful communities, alongside DCF staff. I'll just have to give a shout out to them. Sherry Clark and Betty Drace are the managers of the LEEP partnership, and they've partnered hand in hand to have this work group design everything from the job description to what training is needed to what are the expectations of consultants. And we were surprised they're like holding themselves at a very high standard of how they need to show up. And we're working to support that and find the right balance there. But they've done all of the work to build it, and it's soft launch. We say soft, it's really like not that soft. It's like pretty official. There's 9 consultants now. Bree is one of them. We soft launched in May, and folks are now working on projects across the department, and we're getting the word out there. We're excited. And now we're going to be building to just to continue to further refine, and then to do a broader launch next year and bring on more consultants.
Yeah, and I'm prepared for Deshaun to give me some grief about not knowing what the LEEP acronym stood for, because he will.
Yeah.
But Bree, thinking about sort of your experiences with the youth council, where it's mostly, you're there with people that are about your same age, give or take 2-3 years on either side.
Yeah.
And now with the LEEP consultants, where, you're connecting with people from all walks of life. Their experiences might be different. Their involvement with the system might be different. They might be older, they might be younger. How is that experience with LEEP different from your experience with the youth council?
I would say it's amazing because it's not just like my peers. Like there's people I'm learning from their experience that I have yet to gone through or go through. So I think just coming to the table and really just getting to know everybody and seeing like the different paths of life that they took to get here, I think it's amazing. And I think like the work that we're going to be doing is really going to like change a lot, the Department of Children and Families. So I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Great. So thinking, I talked about, I'm making a lot of football analogies today for whatever reason. I think I got the email about my fantasy league starting back up, so that might be it. But thinking about the goalposts for Family Voice, how do we know when we've been successful? How do we know that the goals have been achieved for the Office of Family Voice? Do we see, is there ever going to be an end to this? Or is this always going to be infused in the department moving forward?
I would say there's definitely never going to be an end to it. But I would love to hear Brianna's thoughts first and foremost.
Thank you. I would say, there would never be an end to it. I think we're just we're the beginning and we're getting our foot in the water. So like, for the next generation that comes and for the generations after that, we have the platform already set so that it's not just something that is just so happen or is a small group of people. Like we want to show the world that like this can be done, like lived experience can sit at a table and work with professionals to get things done and, priorities out there and things change for the greater good of the child welfare system. So, I just think like even with the Dad's Council, with the Parents Council, with the Youth Council, with now the LEEP Consultant Council, I think we're opening up many doors to like this change. And I think overall, like hopefully that the Department of Children and Families, but the child welfare system shrinks down in numbers because now like the department is actually open the doors for people with lived experience so they can get better and then they can get on their feet, whether it's birth parents like myself or youth council members, and really just be there for one another. So I'm excited. Yeah. Thanks.
I mean, I appreciate that piece about that, part of it is it's about relationships, like really, right? Like, so it's about like totally having different relationships to be able to have the government be as responsive as possible to the needs of people in communities. And so like Bria's saying, right, if there's stronger relationships with people, one, that's only going to help everybody, like individually, right? Like you're talking about like your kind of own professional development journey and how it's been impacted by being a part of this work. I think staff could say the same thing. And we want to, we're in the process of building more of how we're kind of evaluating our work. And that's one component of it, I think, is evaluating what is it doing for people individually. And it really, like I said, kind of, I don't not necessarily sides, but on both sides, right? Somebody who's sitting in a staff seat, and we have staff with lived experience, and we're really interested in how do we support others in the department that have lived experience and bringing that forward in a safe way of their choosing. And so that's a piece of it. So I mean, if I speak to the goal though, I mean, like Bree said, it's like the very beginning, right? So like, and there's never going to be an end point. So we want to continue to like grow and refine and be more sophisticated and connected around how this work is happening in a way that is really directed by people with lived experience who've been impacted by the system and by people who are in community. So, I mean, like Bree said, the goal, we know the goal of DCF's transformation overall is that the child welfare, the child protection side of the work is shrinking, because on the other side of the work, like the prevention space, the community partnerships, the family support space, families are getting what they need. And DCF is a catalyst for that in communities, right? That communities are self-directing. And so we only can get there where communities are self-directing what's needed and getting the resources from the government to do that if the people who are in community are driving the work. And so we're starting it right within DCF. There's efforts happening outside of DCF in community that we hope to be a part of and leverage for DCF's knowledge to just continue to grow. So
I wanted to add one more thing. I was
Yeah.
just saying, like, kind of branching off what you were saying. It's the proof, and we're also showing proof that it's working, it's effective. Like the Sibling Bill of Rights, like Enlightenment Program, like we're here and we're actually like doing this, and that is showing that we're being effective with bringing lived experience to the table. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the more work that happens, the more we can spread this. You talked about what's the goal, right? We can't end voice, but maybe we can get to a point where it's so ingrained that it's not necessarily an office, but just exists, right, in the agency. And that can't happen overnight, right? Like we talked at the top, right? It might just wind up with just focus groups. But by really working towards shared leadership, we're able to show how the councils can work. The councils were able to create the Sibling Bill of Rights and NJYRS, and people within the department began to see what it really looked like. And they were more prepared for LEEP. Now we have consultants ready to go, staff ready to have them work on, Brianna's working on complicated stuff that we couldn't have done a couple of years ago, right? RFPs and all this work, where because the department's seen it a little bit, they've heard about the good work, and they're ready to kind of co-design and collaborate with people with lived experience. And as that spreads, hopefully, it can almost happen without necessarily needing as much support from our own office. This is long-term goals where it really has to be ingrained and supported throughout, but maybe it's possible, right? That would be great.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I do want to say, just on a personal basis, thank you for all of the work that you're doing. My favorite part of working in this administration over the last 6 years has been getting to know and work with people with lived experience. It really has helped to inform what I do, and really get to a place of amplifying voices in a way that I wasn't necessarily prepared for when I came in, but it really has made a difference in my work personally, and I think it really is making a difference across the entire department. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
So tune in later this month. We're actually going to be celebrating a birthday. Our Division on Women is turning 50, and we're going to talk to leadership within DOW about the important work that they do to support survivors and empower women in leadership positions across the board, across the state of New Jersey. So we hope you'll tune into that conversation. And on behalf of my producers and the Office of Communications and Public Affairs, this is Jason Bukowski signing off, and tune in later this month for more DCF on the Air.